I would first like to thank the Maine State Chamber of Commerce for hosting these webinars, especially through these times where knowledge and information are so valuable to all of us. Our state has shown remarkable teamwork and unity, so I would also like to thank everyone here today, from one Maine business to another, for your commitment to keeping each other and our communities safe. And from the entire Hammond team, we would like to wish everyone a safe and happy new year. We're looking forward to the days ahead of us in 2021.
Hammond Lumber Company is a fourth-generation, family-owned and operated business. Founded in 1953, Hammond Lumber has steadily grown into Maine's largest independent lumber and building material supplier. We want to thank you for supporting our Maine family business this past year and every year. We feel privileged to have again served the needs of our Maine communities across our 21 locations statewide. The Hammond team is made up of 800 dedicated employees. When you're ready to tackle your next building project, no matter how big or small, depend on Hammond Lumber Company for the products and services you need. Whether you're a contractor, homeowner, or do-it-yourselfer, Hammond Lumber will see your project through from start to finish. The knowledgeable staff at Hammond Lumber will be with you every step of the way and keep your project on schedule. From free estimating and planning to design and drafting services, and a wide variety of building and remodeling products, including complete home and garage packages, Hammond Lumber, the 2020 Pro Sales Dealer of the Year, is proud to be your building project partner. From our Maine business to yours, we wish you success and good health as we move through the new year in 2021. Learn more at hammondlumber.com or stop by the Hammond location nearest you. Thank you from everyone at Hammond Lumber Company.
Well, to both of our sponsors, on behalf of the Chamber, we thank you. And at this time, it's my pleasure to turn it over to our recently elected Chair of the Board of Directors, Cliff Grime. Cliff, as many of you know, was President and CEO of Harriman Associates, and more recently has formed his own company. Frosty Hill Consulting is the name of that company. And Cliff, it's a pleasure to turn it over to you for your words of welcome as well. I think Cliff is frozen in place.
No, I'm here. I'm here. Gotcha. Sorry. But I guess what I would just say is that welcome to everybody. It seems like a year ago, we were dealing with a very robust economy. We were focusing on a strategic plan for the state. We were talking about how we find talented employees, innovation for our economy, and critical support and investment in our infrastructure. Today, we find ourselves trying to mitigate this pandemic that's impacted all of us, transition to a sort of a COVID reality. How do we deal and live with this and the next version of this virus, and how that's going to impact us all? So when I think about transitioning back to a normalcy or redefining a normalcy, and I also try to keep focus on our strategic plan that the state has generated, I say these bills, this legislative session is probably going to be very, very important, as important as any that I can remember. And so I hope you all have good questions and interests. But when I look forward, I see us focusing on whatever the bills are, how they categorize into those primary areas of the state's priorities: talent, innovation, and critical support. And I hope that we can all together move this forward so the state succeeds, we all succeed, and we can get back to some sense of normalcy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the advocacy team, and they can walk you through some of the highlights.
Cliff, good morning, and thank you. And all of you who are on this morning, thank you for joining us. We've done all kinds of these, so there are folks on this webinar this morning, this presentation this morning, that have heard some of this before already. I know we seem to be a little glitchy this morning, and we apologize for that. But I can assure you we're all here and we're ready to talk to you about what we see on the horizon this legislative session. Before I begin, I did notice we actually have some legislators with us this morning. I saw Senator Breen and then Representative Wood, Bailey, Sachs, and Arford. And I want to thank you all for joining us this morning and for listening in on what we see. You folks are on the ground, so you may all be able to offer us some insight as we go on. But we'll do a little prognostication this morning as we've done in the past, and we'll talk about the issues that each of us are following and what we see as critical issues as we move forward. To begin with, the legislature has met once on opening day, and they have not, to my knowledge, scheduled another session to meet again. However, committees are up and running, and they are beginning their work on orientation, and then as far as the Appropriations Committee goes, public hearings on the supplemental budget. Other committees have scheduled public hearings as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that. As some of you are aware, in the first session, well, let's go back for a minute. The legislature is trying to do what it's never done before, and that's conduct debates and discussions around public policy and make laws for this state in the midst of a pandemic. So obviously this is challenging, and obviously this is new ground. We'll talk a little bit about the public hearing and work session process as we go forward. But as is the usual case, the legislature had the opportunities all legislators had the opportunity to submit bill titles back until mid-December. And as a result of those submissions, there were about 1,689 titles that will end up potentially as bills this legislative session. And they cover the gamut. And again, each of us will talk a little bit in broad strokes about what some of those issues are. But I did not put this list together, but I think it's interesting, and I'm not sure it's exactly accurate. And again, when you look at 1,689 titles, there are a number of repeat bills. So it's expected that some of those repeats will be combined and condensed. But overall, Health and Human Services Committee will get 197 of those titles, Education 152, Taxation 135, Criminal Justice and Public Safety 133, Health Coverage and Insurance Financial Services 129, Vets and Legal Affairs 123, Labor and Housing 118, Judiciary 116, State and Local Government 109, Education and Utilities 92, the IDEA Committee will get 84, Transportation 84, Energy, Environment and Natural Resources, 66, Agricultural 48, Inland Fish 47, Appropriations and Financial Affairs 40, and Marine Resources 13. And again, that was a preliminary snapshot based on people's observations about where titles might go based on how the revisor's office sectioned them off by committee. But obviously, legislating in a pandemic is going to be challenging. Legislating in a pandemic with as many bills as each of these committees will have, and conducting their business virtually will be equally challenging. So a quick snapshot of where the session is and what it looks like. I'm gonna ask Ben to begin, talk a little bit about the broad policy issues based on those bill titles that he'll be following. And then he'll go to Linda, we'll circle back to me. We'll talk a little bit about the public hearing process and work sessions. And then if you have questions, we'll try and answer them. So with that, Ben, go right ahead.
Thanks, Peter. And I'd like to just, the policy areas that I'm gonna be working on this legislative session, there's two. There's the environment and energy policy area, and then there's the workforce and education. I'll start with discussing the the energy and environment area. And I think it's important to note when we look at the bills, and there's about 150 bills been referenced between the Environment and Natural Resources Committee and the Energy and Utilities Committee, that we look at the work that's been done over the past year by the Maine Climate Council. In the report they released, Maine Can't Wait. And if you look at a lot of the recommendations within the Maine Climate Council report, and you look at the bill titles, there's a lot of bills coming out of that, which we fully expected. So I think if we look at this legislative session and policy decisions we're going to be making, they're going to be surrounding some of the recommendations in that report, and looking at a high level of meeting our carbon reduction goals of 2030, 80% reduction by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050, embracing the future of transportation, looking at electric vehicles, increased fuel efficiency in alternative fuels, modernizing Maine's building infrastructure, looking at efficiency and reducing emissions in these buildings, and growing Maine's clean energy economy and protecting our environment. That's looking at new generation as the old generation comes offline, the new generation, whether it be if we look at wind, solar, the renewable energy sectors here in the state of Maine. A lot of the bills in the environment and energy area are going to be driven by the recommendations contained by the Maine Climate Council in that report, Maine Can't Wait. I encourage everyone, if you're working in this area, to look at that. There's going to be other issues that we continue to work on, environment and natural resources. Solid waste is always an issue for the business community here in Maine. There's going to be recycling and packaging legislation. We know by the bill titles that are going to be important issues that we work on. So as we look at the overall policy discussions in environment, I think it's important to note to look at those important documents that have been worked on over the past year, and the policymakers that are going to be making the decisions are going to look at the good work that was done by the Maine Climate Council when we're looking at environment and energy. Shifting over to workforce development and education, I think it's a very similar situation in terms of looking at some work that's been done leading up to the legislative session that dovetails. Going back to 2018, when the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, we released our report, Making Maine Work, done in conjunction with the Maine Development Foundation and Educate Maine. You look at some of the recommendations contained in that after we surveyed 1,000 businesses. A lot of it had to do with workforce. 3 of the 5 top priority issues for the Maine business community surrounded the size of our workforce, the skill of our workforce, and the supply of our workforce, growing our economy. And that dovetails nicely into the 10-year strategic plan that was done, put out by the governor's office, by the administration. A lot of it focused on workforce development here in the state of Maine. And then that follows up to most recently the Economic Recovery Committee. If we look at, the challenges we dealt with during COVID, if you look at the recommendations within the Economic Recovery Committee, we know if we're going to grow our economy, it's going to have to focus on workforce development here in the state of Maine, education, and in turn, broadband expansion as well that supports both of those. So with that as kind of a key and looking at that, I think a lot of the bills before the IDEA Committee and the Education Committee, which are a couple hundred bills, are going to surround these goals made in Making Maine Work, those made in the Economic Recovery Committee and the 10-year strategic plan. They all dovetail very nicely together. And they really are based in some work that the Maine State Chamber of Commerce started back in 2015 called Maine Spark. We joined together with Maine Development Foundation, again, Educate Maine, Maine's university system, the community colleges, the Finance Authority of Maine. And we came together and we developed a goal for the state that was enacted by the legislature, which is to in order to grow our economy, our population will have to achieve a 60% post-secondary degree attainment by 2025. At that time, we set that goal. Our state, we had a post-secondary degree attainment level of 42%. Since then, we've made some progress. We're well north of 50%. And I think we're going to continue to make that progress in this legislative session. If you look at the bill titles and we look at what's going to be driving this session, and a part of that key is growing our post-secondary degree attainment of 60% by 2025 isn't just 2- and 4-year degrees. It's also credentials of value. And looking at how can we grow Maine's economy through professional licenses, delivering education in different ways and forms to meet our economy. And as we look at bill titles and we present it to the IDEA Committee, which will be dealing with a lot of this in the upcoming legislative session, it's going to be how can we achieve that goal that is based in growing our economy at a conservative rate of 1% per year over the next 5 years, with dealing with post-secondary degrees of attainment. So that's workforce development education. There's going to be specific issues we'll deal with surrounding that. A big piece of that as well, and it kind of crosses over the two, is the broadband expansion in Maine. We know in order to, and we're living it today with COVID, that broadband in all parts of Maine is important in order to operate and grow our economy. We know there's going to be bond issues dealing with it. We just passed a bond issue, but there's more work to be done. Within the governor's budget, they allocated $1.8 million to study mapping here in the state of Maine. That's an important first step. And we applaud the governor's office for taking that step to look at broadband expansion in Maine. And that's going to be a key issue as well. And like I said, it crosses over. A lot of it will be in the Energy and Utilities Committee. Some of it will be in the realm of the idea and the Education Committee, because the importance that broadband means to growing our workforce here in the state of Maine. So that's a broad overview of both those areas, but I think it's important to note that there's some good work that's been done in the off season here and some recommendations to the legislature. And a lot of the bill titles that we see are based in those recommendations. And the documents, like I said, and I'll repeat it, in the environment and energy area, we need to look at the Maine Can't Wait report, looking at workforce development and education, looking at Making Maine Work done by the Maine Chamber and our partners, also looking at the 10-year strategic plan put out by the administration, and recently the Economic Recovery Committee looking for our path forward recovering from the COVID pandemic. So those are the important ones to look at, and we'll be working with the legislative committees of jurisdiction in order to achieve those goals. So Linda, I know you got quite a bit to talk about in terms of tax.
Yeah, and
budget,
taxation.
so I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, and taxation this year, we've got, as Peter noted, you've got about 135 bills that the taxation committee is going to be dealing with. So there's a lot of different issues that are on the table. You've got issues dealing with tax havens, corporate income tax, individual income tax, wealth taxes. You've got local option taxes. You've got estate taxes. You've got a lot of different bills potentially that would increase taxes. You've got a lot of other bills like education credits that we support. So we're really, they've got a lot on their plate this year. In addition to that, they've got 3 reports coming out of OPEGA, which we're watching very closely. One report on the Better and BED program, one on the Maine Capital New Markets program, and one on the Pine Tree Development program. There are recommendations in here that we do not support. We have testified before the Government Oversight Committee as to the respect of that. So we're going to be watching those very closely. The Taxation Committee will be dealing with that. In addition to that, the budget. Governor Mills released her budget last Friday. Good news is for the business community, no new taxes. So we're very pleased to see that, I think. There was a slight increase on the budget, 57 million, that dealt with apparently mandatory health insurance and some mandatory costs like teacher retirement. But overall, that budget from a business community's perspective is good. She balanced the budget from what I'm told on a lot of curtailments, increased revenue reprojections that came in ahead of schedule. And you may think, well, why in a pandemic do we have more revenues? Well, sales tax, online sales have been really strong. And no doubt people have been home, they've been shopping online. That's helped the economy. They've also, individual income tax line items have been up as well. So a lot of the shortfalls that you saw came down. And really with some COVID response funds, I guess the governor has been able to balance that budget, which is good. We applaud those efforts. A lot of things in the budget that we like Ben mentioned, the 1.8 million for broadband expansion. There's also 45 million in there for education. There's more money for homestead. So there's a lot of different things in there that, we like. And again, the budget, even though there's no new taxes right now, the legislature has to take that budget, and they're going to be doing that over the next several weeks and months. There will be public hearings on the different sections of the budget. So nothing's set in stone yet. There potential is increases out there. We don't know. Hopefully they hold the line. But ultimately folks are asking, what about tax conformity? Well, apparently from what we heard, we don't know this because we haven't seen the language, but we heard that there's going to be a proposal, a change package coming in on Monday before the Appropriations Committee. And Senator Breen can correct me if I'm wrong, but what we heard was we heard that with respect to tax conformity, as you recall, the federal government has forgiven the PP, the payroll protection loans, and they also have allowed taxpayers to deduct the expenses associated with those loans. From what we heard, the governor is not going to propose that. What she's going to propose, and again, this is hearsay, that you can deduct the expenses associated with those loans, but the loans will have to be added back into taxable income. So again, we haven't seen anything, but that's kind of the rumor out there. So that's what is happening with tax conformity. We have heard a lot from our constituents. They're very concerned about that because, you know, they've been focused on what the federal government is going to do, and they expected the state to do the same. But as we know, with tax conformity, there has to be a balanced budget. And so there has to be, you know, room on both sides. But again, there are a lot of businesses out there that are very concerned about this. I also know that Senator Breen has a bill in there about that. I haven't seen the language, but I don't know what the bill does. But again, that is going to be an issue for a lot of businesses around the state. In addition to that, we're just going to be, we have two pieces of legislation that we've initiated here at the chamber. One is sponsored by Senator Maddie Daughtry, which will be basically extend the Pine Tree Development Program, which is set to expire in December of 2021, out 3 years. And we also have another piece of legislation, which is very important as well, sponsored by Representative Kathleen Dillingham, which will basically, this is the safe harbor legislation for liability for not only businesses, but for nonprofits, for educational institutions, and for municipalities around the state. There's a huge concern that there will be an onslaught of lawsuits after this pandemic. And this bill essentially is a Good Samaritan bill. If you've done the right thing, if you attempted to keep your employees and your customers, and you've tried to, you know, abide by the CDC guidelines and any other guidelines that are out there, then you should be exempt from liability. And so that bill we were expecting Congress to do something on that. They did not. But there are a lot of states around the country that are instituting these pieces of legislation because they're very concerned. You know, businesses around the state have suffered an enormous losses with this pandemic. And this is to protect really the good actors, not the bad actors. So that bill will be in as well. So that's really, you know, we have our hands full in taxation. We've got a lot of issues, and it's going to be a busy session.
Before I jump into my issue, I'm wondering if we have and there are a lot of diverse folks on this, from diverse businesses on this call this morning, people who sometimes participate in these, and there's a lot of folks that don't. For those of you that don't know, Senator Kathy Breen is on the phone from Cumberland County, and she is also the Senate Chair of the Appropriations Committee. And I know that I saw a chat message that said legislators needed to leave for a meeting, so I don't know what Senator Breen's timing is, but I'm wondering if she might be willing to comment a little bit on the budget process and the tax conformity issue that Linda just touched on before we go to my issue. So Senator Breen, is that something, you know, want to recognize you and thank you for joining us here this morning. And maybe you'd like to add a few comments to what Linda had to say.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for giving me a little time. The first thing I wanted to point out is that I put the reports that Ben Gilman referenced in the chat, the Economic Recovery Committee report, as well as the Maine Climate Council report. So folks can look at those at their convenience. And Linda is correct. There are a number of proposals for tax conformity in the supplemental budget. And when I finish speaking, I'll put in the chat the link to that budget and the pages where you see the language for tax conformity. What the Revenue Service folks have not had the opportunity to do thus far is suggest what we do around the most recent federal legislation. So there was CARES Act money, and there was federal guidance around taxes and the government the governor made some statements about exemptions and that sort of thing over the summer. So those are some of the things that are in the supplemental budget. However, the most recent changes that happened in December with that federal relief came some more federal tax changes around the CARES Act funding, and even things that aren't in the CARES Act funding, even tax changes that go back to 2018. So the Revenue Service is working very, very closely with the state CPA Association to try to digest that and to try to figure out how best to recommend how Maine conforms, with those federal changes. So as folks have said, some states across the country automatically conform to federal changes. Maine is not one of them. Maine is able to pick and choose. And what we do is try to do that in an advantageous and fair way. And I can say that what I'm hearing from the administration is that they are trying to, how do I want to say this, make the tax changes beneficial to the business community, but also in keeping with tax principles that are already in place. So I'm not a tax expert. I'm going to stop there because I really don't know how better to say it in English. But on next Monday, the 25th, the committee that I chair, the Appropriations Committee, will have public hearings on the tax portion of the supplemental budget. So we will be hearing more from the administration during those meetings. I suspect Linda and Peter and others will be tuning in, and we will be learning then what the administration hopes to do around these very new federal changes that came down in December. So I'm going to stop there. And as I said, I will put in the chat the link to the supplemental budget with the caveat that that's not final. There's more suggested changes to come next week.
Senator, thank you so much for your comments. I also want to note that the Senator has already put in chat the Climate Council report, the Economic Recovery Committee report, and she's going to add the other report on tax. So thank you for doing that. And folks can access those links right through the chat function. So from my perspective on policy issues that I'll be following, I think I should have probably said at the outset that this session, obviously, legislators are going to spend a lot of time focusing on, the impact of COVID on the state, on the individual citizenry, but as well as on the business community and the economy overall, and try and craft legislation that addresses that. So when you look at those 1,700 odd titles, you see a lot of legislation impacting that. At the same time, you will also see legislation that is, sort of super carryover legislation. They were themes or bills that were submitted during the 129th legislature. And as you will remember, because of the COVID outbreak, the legislature was forced to adjourn very abruptly in mid-March. And there were 400 plus odd bills left in the process that ended up dying when the legislature adjourned sine die or without day. And as a consequence, a number of legislators who had worked on those bills in the 129th have brought some of those titles back. And I think that's the case with Ben, with Linda, and it's certainly the case with myself. And so when I look at legislation, particularly in the Labor and Housing Committee, I see a mixture of bills that I think is a combination of, in response to COVID, as well as new issues that have come up, old issues that are being revisited this session. So from a broad perspective in the Labor and Housing Committee, we know we're going to be dealing with wage issues. It appears that there are bills to raise the minimum wage, bills to change how we index the minimum wage. There are titles that appear to address the issue of wage preemption. In other words, the state not allowing municipalities to implement a minimum wage that's higher than what the state has done, similar to what was done with the earned paid leave legislation in 2019. Again, from a COVID perspective, there are a number of bill titles around leave, workplace leave, expansion of FMLA. One bill has already been printed on that and scheduled for a public hearing in the first week in May. There are sort of more amorphous titles around leave issues and leave in the workplace, but we really, so, you know, it might be an act to improve employees in the workplace as a result of COVID-19. But we really don't know what that means because all we see at the present time is the title. I do think the earned paid leave law, which went into effect in January, it appears there are a few titles on that, so that may be addressed again. There's one around wage cash out, and I believe there's another on litigation around that issue. There is a bill on employment at leave. As you know, Maine is an employment at leave state, as almost all states are. This would end employment at will in the state, according to the bill title. The specifics of it, I don't know. I think, again, as a result of COVID-19, there'll be a lot of conversations around Maine's unemployment insurance system. I've already heard some legislators speak to that. As all of you know, the system was stressed in the state unlike never before, but because of some of the reforms that were put in place back 20 years ago, our state was much better prepared in our unemployment insurance system. At least the taxation system was much better prepared to meet the challenges, although no one could have anticipated, the rapid increase in unemployment in the state and the need for the size of the payout out of the trust fund that the pandemic created. And I know that the department was faced with some logistical challenges and some operational challenges dealing with that, the rapid rise in Maine's unemployment system almost overnight and the need for people to file and access benefits as a result of that. But the good news for Maine's unemployment insurance, we did not go insolvent. And that was the idea of the reforms that were put in place that the Chamber, in fact, worked on back 20 years ago. And we developed a very elastic taxation system that allows the state to sort of the department to flatten out the very highs and to shallow the very lows. So there's a sense of consistency in taxation. Unfortunately, the draw on the fund was massive. And while we did not become insolvent, there was a tax increase required of about $20 million spread across the employer community this session to help replenish the fund. At the same time, Governor Mills put in almost $300 million in CARES Act money to also bolster the unemployment insurance fund. But I expect there'll be a significant discussion around UI on how the money is spent, how benefits are accessed, who should be eligible for benefits, and for how long. Obviously, there are a lot of new people coming into the system. So understanding of the system and how it works and what it was designed to do will be very important as we go forward. And then lastly, under the COVID side, there are a number of bills that say an act to improve Maine labor laws, an act to improve workplace laws in the state of Maine. Again, we don't really know what those titles are, and we're just going to have to wait and see. On sort of repeat issues we're going to see again in the labor and housing, we will revisit the issue of overtime and who is the overtime, what's known as the overtime standard. There is a three-pronged test to determine who is a salaried employee and exempt from overtime versus those who are hourly employees and who are qualified for overtime pay after 40 hours. That bill was submitted last session, LD 42. It's back this session. There will be legislation around what's known as ban the box, which was a bill that we worked with Representative Talbot Ross on last session and was poised to go through the bodies. We came to a compromise on that bill with the Labor Committee and the bill sponsor. The title is back again, whether it's the same language or not, we don't know. There is a bill that would prohibit the use of non-disclosure agreements in the settlement of discrimination cases. We had problems with that bill, but so did the governor. That bill was yet another piece of legislation that died when the legislature adjourned. I believe we will touch on workers' compensation issues. There are a half dozen workers' comp bills in. It appears that at least 4 of them deal with the public sector, but from the private sector, there are 2 titles. Again, amorphous titles, don't really know what they are. We'll be watching those very carefully. As you know, in 2019, we dealt with about 30 comp bills, very controversial. We came to a negotiated settlement around the outcome of those bills. We had hoped that that would be the end of it. We'll see what the appetite is in the legislature to deal with those type of bills. And lastly, on the healthcare side, I mean, health insurance continues to be, and the cost of health insurance continues to be a major issue for Maine small business community in particular. The administration through the Bureau of Insurance and directed by the legislature has been working on merging the individual and small group markets, as well as clear choice plan design throughout the last year, the remainder of 2020. Adding to that will be a number of bills dealing with billing, prescription drugs, telehealth and the expansion of telehealth. There are a number of mandates that have been mandated benefit proposals that have been submitted. And then there's LD1, which seeks to codify much of what the state and the federal government is already requiring around COVID-19 in terms of testing, vaccines, prescription drugs. Much of that is already part of either state or federal requirements. This bill would seek to enshrine that in state statute. So from a public policy standpoint, those are sort of the issues that I will be following on behalf of the chamber and our membership. I don't know, Dana, whether we want to, I haven't seen any questions yet in chat around any of the issues that we've talked about. So I'm going to move forward and talk then a little bit about the work sessions and public hearings. Late last week, the legislature released some guidance documents around how public hearings and work sessions will be conducted in the virtual world. This is something that obviously the chamber was concerned about, and we pulled together a very diverse group of lobbyists of all kinds, not just business lobbyists, but advocates in the human services world, the conservation world, et cetera, to try and put some recommendations down that we hope would help the legislature. People who've been around and lobbied a long time, and our basic observations. We did submit that to legislative leadership, and we were waiting to see what would come out. And last week, the documents were made available. The guidance documents were made available, and we did send that out on Friday as a advocacy bulletin from the chamber. Obviously, legislating in a virtual world is going to be new and challenging, and public participation will be incumbent on people who want to participate to follow along and watch bills and watch committees and how they work. So there's an opening for them to deliver their testimony. The guidelines are there, and there is a way for people to participate. I think, as an observer and part of the group that submitted their recommendations, I think these guidelines are a bit rigid. And I hope that as the process goes along and people start to get used to testifying in a virtual world, the legislature will see this as organic and will make changes and adapt according to according to what they see and experience. But at the outset, from a public hearing perspective, you need to, and if you want to testify on a bill, you have to register in advance. And the guidelines say at least 30 minutes in advance, at least what's going out from the committee. But if you register that 30-minute window before a public hearing, you may not get picked to testify. If you register in advance and submit your written testimony, you can get on the testimony list and you will be an attendee in the meeting. The clerk, the analyst, and the committee members will be panelists. And the committee public hearing will be broadcast on, all committees have YouTube channels. And so everyone will be able to follow along on public hearings via their YouTube channels. The If you want to participate, you have to have a Zoom link and be prepared when you are called upon to testify. The guidelines say the testimony will be delivered in alphabetical order, but it's not clear if that alphabetical order will be sort of everybody in the committee, everybody who wants to testify on the Zoom call will be called in alphabetical order, or they'll break that out according to proponents, opponents, and neither for nor against. The guidelines ask that you submit your testimony in writing in advance. If you do, then legislators should have it at the time of the public hearing. If you don't, there's a chance they won't have it at the time of the public hearing. And you do have to testify when you sign up to testify. You do have to indicate, obviously, what bill you're going to testify on, but where you're going to testify during the public hearing process. And that's important. We'll come back to that. Work sessions. It appears that in advance of the work sessions, the legislature, the committee chairs, the analysts, and the clerks will decide who is going to participate, and they will ask them to be part of that Zoom call, first as an attendee and then brought in at the appropriate time if they want their input on a piece of legislation as a panelist. So overall, I mean, the legislature has developed a workable process for public input. And there's a couple of observations that we've made in our advocacy bulletin, and I'll make them again here. First of all, allowing participation through the virtual world opens the door to a lot more participation from people who are in more rural parts of the state or who are just geographically further away from Augusta. A traditional public hearing requires you to come to Augusta to deliver your testimony. The ability to testify virtually, as long as you follow the guidelines and are able to register in advance, means that you don't have to drive if you're in Mars Hill 4.5 hours to testify in Augusta and then drive 4.5 hours back home. So it increases the likelihood that people who might not have participated in the public hearing process will be able to do so. However, if you want to participate in the virtual world, you have to have either a phone or a broadband connection and some kind of internet device, whether it's a tablet or computer or whatever. There is no front-facing lobbying or testimony in the legislature this session. And there's probably good reason for that, given the spread of COVID and the danger to staff and legislators for having done that. But that is an observation. At the same time, I think there are problems with the public hearing and the work session guidelines as laid out. It doesn't indicate how any amendments to public hearings or during a public hearing or a work session will be handled. Will they be provided in advance? If you prepared testimony for a bill as it's written and the sponsor presents a bill, an amendment at that public hearing that suddenly makes your testimony irrelevant or alters the nature of your testimony, how do you deal with that in the virtual process? We're not sure, and those are the kind of things we're hoping the legislature, as the process goes on, will be able to address with greater clarity. So those are our observations on work sessions and public hearings. It's certainly a good start, but like everything else, as we deal with COVID, I think we'll be adapting as time goes on. So that's sort of it, Dana, I think from my perspective. I don't know if Dana or Linda has anything else they want to add. And again, I haven't seen any questions either at this point. So
Peter, I'd like to just follow up on you just got with the virtual outline and having presented to the IDEA committee yesterday and going through the process. And it is an evolving process, and I think you're right, public hearings and work sessions will be interesting. But I did a presentation yesterday to the IDEA committee, worked with a committee clerk and with the OPLA analysts and the committee members. And I will say, to their credit, a lot of work has gone into this, and it was a seamless process. As we saw this morning, there are technical difficulties that happen in this platform, but it was streamed on YouTube. I entered into the Zoom chat room during my presentation. It was very similar to this. So I think it is a work in progress, and I think we're all going to be getting used to it. I think public hearings and work sessions, but going through the process, just presenting to a committee in terms of the process that yesterday, I think the committee staff and the OPLA staff and those that are working in the State House to make this happen, we do have to give them some credit for that. But knowing that it's not going to be perfect in a virtual world until we're back in the building as well. So I just wanted to add that to it, that experience yesterday working with the staff there was they're doing everything they can to make for a good environment. So,
Well,
yeah, I think that, I mean, the technical challenges setting this up for this session were immense. So the fact that there are committees that are already up and running and people are trained in how to use Zoom is to the legislature staff credit. It really is. And I'm glad to hear that, from an opening perspective, it seems to be working well. It doesn't surprise me. Again, I think the biggest glitches are the unexpected ones. Not unlike this morning, nothing is going to run perfectly. And we're just going to have to wade our way through it. We're pathfinding, we're breaking new ground.
Yep, I think that's well said. I think we realized in this past year that nothing has remained the same. And most notably, I think we've all realized that we are a resilient population here in the state of Maine. And when the chips are down, we can make it work. And we've proven that we have made it work and will continue to do so. I thank all three of you for the presentation today. As I would note early on at the opening, we mentioned that it is early. We're looking at it from a perspective of on the horizon. There's much more that will take place that we'll be sharing with you, but clearly there is a lot to talk about, and that's just been proven in the last hour. We hope that that this will not be the only opportunity. We really appreciate how Zoom and this pandemic has brought us all closer together when it comes to sharing information and the ability to work together. And I would say that if I don't say it again, I want to be sure to say it at least now, is that we appreciate all who have joined us today, and we hope this is not the only opportunity. We're eager to hear from you, whether it's a question, a comment, but we're also very eager to work with all of you, that we know that as we have faced the pandemic and we've all come together as a state, that whatever the issues may be, and I think we're off to a good start, that our success will come when we all do work together. And I think the comments today kind of highlight that and reinforce that. And we hope, and that is the case during the session, and we predict that it will be. We've learned this past year the value it brings, and I think it's a great message for the issues that we face, both good as well as challenging in the next several months. Now, I know we asked for people to put in the chat, but if any of you have any questions right now and want to raise your hand, we do have one from Susan Norton as well as Kathy. Senator Breen says that public hearings are one way of influencing the legislature. You can also call us and email us. That's a great point. The same to be said here as well for us. The Chamber is proud of our advocacy team, and we're on top of most issues, but we're always eager to hear from you and to take your comments and try to represent you in the best way we possibly can. I think there was another comment in the chat room that I just lost. Yeah, Susan Norton said to all of us, nicely done, folks. Longtime member of the Maine Bankers Legislative Committee. Nice to get the Chamber's perspective. And the same for you, Susan. It's a pleasure to have the partnership with bankers, and we look forward to having the same this year as well. Anybody want to show their hand? We're on the sponsor page, which is a hint to me to thank them again, which I do with pleasure. But if there's anybody else that wants to ask a question or make a comment, please know that I repeat this. This is not the only opportunity for you to do that. You can do it anytime by reaching out to us, either through email, leave a voicemail if we're not right here, or call us on our cell phone or here at the office. We'll be sure to get back to you.
If anyone does have a question and they want to raise their hand, I'm happy to unmute you. I don't see any, Dana.
Okay, well, and again, I thank our sponsors. I sincerely thank all of you. I hope this has been informative and helpful. I can say also sincerely that we look forward to working with each and every one of you and to help you with any questions that you may have. But most of all, we have an opportunity in the next several months, and success will come when we realize it's about all of us and all of us coming together to pursue the things that are in the best interest of people, the employer, as well as the employee. With that, I thank you, all of you, and look forward to the next time that we can do this. Thank you.